The sun was high over the alien city, yet the streets of the market felt dark and heavy. Merchants shouted prices for goods. Animals cried from cages. Now the smell of smoke mixed with the scent of spices. At the far end of the bazaar, a crowd gathered around one stall, their voices low with curiosity and fear. Inside a small iron cage sat a young alien girl. Her skin was a pale silver blue, her eyes sharp like a predator. Glowing faintly under the sunlight, her hair, black as night, was tangled and wild. Falling over her thin shoulders, chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles, and even a collar was fastened around her neck. The merchant holding the cage stepped forward. Holding a piece of dried meat on a stick, "Eat, little beast," he said with a cruel smile. The girl's eyes narrowed, her lips pulling back to reveal small but razor-sharp teeth as the merchant brought the meat closer. She lunged, sinking her teeth into his finger instead. He shouted in pain, pulling back his hand as blood dripped onto the dirt. The crowd gasped, some laughing nervously, others shaking their heads. "She's untamable." One alien muttered, "Worthless. Dangerous. Better to put her down," the merchant growled, wrapping a cloth around his bleeding finger. "Untamable. Yes, maybe. But still worth a price," he said bitterly. From the edge of the crowd, a human man watched quietly. Ethan Cross had come to the market for supplies, water filters, food rations, maybe a few spare tools for his ship. But now his eyes were fixed on the girl in the cage. She looked fierce, but beneath the sharpness, he saw something else. Her gaze darted constantly, like she was expecting another blow, another grab. Her hands trembled slightly. Even as she growled, Ethan knew that look it wasn't the look of a wild animal, but of someone who had been hurt too many times. "What's her story?" Ethan asked the merchant as he stepped forward. The merchant snorted. "Her story? She's a wildling from the outer forests of Orel Prime. Her clan was wiped out by hunters. We caught her weeks ago. She bites, scratches, refuses food unless it's stolen. No discipline, no manners, nothing." He gestured to the crowd. "No one wants her, and I can't keep feeding a useless creature." The merchant smirked. "Unless you want her. Human, but I doubt you'd survive a day." Ethan didn't answer at first. He crouched down in front of the cage. Meeting the girl's eyes, she hissed at him, baring her teeth again. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he said softly, "You're not a beast, are you?" Her growl faltered for just a second, but then she turned her head away, refusing to look at him. "I'll take her," Ethan said suddenly, his voice steady. The crowd murmured in disbelief, some laughing outright. The merchant blinked. "What? You're serious? She's dangerous." "I said I'll take her," Ethan repeated, pulling out a small pouch of credits. The merchant grinned greedily, snatching the pouch and counting the coins. "Fine, she's yours. Don't come crying to me when she bites your hand off." The cage door creaked open. 2 guards stepped forward to pull the girl out. But she fought fiercely, kicking and twisting. They shoved her toward Ethan, her wrists still bound by rope. She stumbled but quickly stood, glaring at him as if daring him to come closer. Ethan didn't grab her. He simply stepped back and said, "Let's go." Turning to walk away, the crowd watched in silence, expecting her to resist. At first, she stood still, her eyes scanning for escape. But then, to everyone's surprise, she began to follow him, her steps small and cautious. Some whispered, "He won't last a day." Others shook their heads. The merchant just laughed to himself, certain the human had made a foolish mistake. Ethan led her through the winding streets until they reached the quieter edge of the market. He stopped at a small food stall, buying a piece of soft bread and a flask of water. He set them on a low wall and stepped back, not looking at her. For a long time she didn't move. Then, when she thought he wasn't watching, she snatched the bread, biting into it with quiet hunger. Ethan pretended not to notice, simply walking on as they moved away from the market. The noise faded, replaced by the sound of the wind between the narrow alleys. The girl kept her distance, never walking too close. Her rope still tied, but loose. In Ethan's hand, she was free to run if she wanted, but she didn't. When they reached the small inn where Ethan planned to stay the night, he stopped at the door. "You can stay inside or out here." "Your choice," he said simply. She stared at him, confused. Most people would have forced her, chained her again, maybe beaten her into obedience, but he just walked inside, leaving the door slightly open minutes later. The girl stepped inside, silent as a shadow. Ethan glanced at her, but said nothing. He knew trust would take time, but he had seen it in her eyes, even for just a moment. The fear could fade, and the wildness could be something else. Something strong, something free. That night, the market of chains faded into memory, but for the girl, the sound of the human's calm voice stayed, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't sleep with her fists clenched. The morning light crept through the small cracks of the wooden shutters. Ethan woke early, hearing the soft shuffle of movement in the corner of the room. The alien girl was crouched there, her knees pulled up to her chest. Watching him with unblinking eyes, she had not moved from that spot all night. Her wrists were still bound by rope, though loosely, and her collar still clung to her neck like a silent threat from her past. Ethan sat up slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Hungry?" he asked, his tone calm and steady. She didn't answer, just kept her eyes fixed on him. He reached for a small packet of dried fruit from his bag and placed it on the table. Then he stepped back, giving her space. For a while, she didn't move, but when Ethan turned his back, he heard the faint rustle of the packet being opened. She ate in quick, small bites, as if afraid someone would take it away. After breakfast, Ethan prepared to leave the inn. The shopkeeper warned him quietly. "That girl will be trouble. Human. You should keep her tied up or locked away." Ethan ignored the advice, walking back to her. He crouched and began untying the ropes around her wrists. She tensed, her eyes narrowing, but didn't pull away when the ropes fell to the floor. She rubbed her wrists slowly, as if she couldn't believe they were free. "Come on, Ethan," said, walking toward the door. She didn't move. Instead, she sat down on the floor. Crossing her arms, Ethan stopped and turned back, raising an eyebrow. "You're not coming?" he asked. She looked away, her chin lifting in silent defiance. It was the first sign that her spirit hadn't been broken and, maybe the first challenge for him. Ethan didn't drag her or shout. He simply opened the door and stepped outside. A few minutes later, she appeared in the doorway, glaring at him as if annoyed, without a word. She followed him into the busy streets. The market was alive with noise again. Merchants shouted, carts rolled over cobblestones, and the air smelled of fresh bread and roasting meat. Ethan stopped at a stall selling warm bread, buying a loaf and handing it to her. She refused to take it, crossing her arms again. Ethan didn't force it into her hands. He simply walked ahead, taking a bite himself when she thought he wasn't looking. She took the bread from his pack and ate it, her eyes flicking toward him in suspicion. Ethan said nothing, hiding his small smile as they moved through the streets. Some people recognized her from the day before. They whispered, pointing at the silver-blue skin. "The collar around her neck, isn't that the wild one? The one who bit the merchant?" Someone said, "She'll bite him too. Just wait." Another replied. The girl's eyes darkened, her steps slowing. Ethan noticed and gently guided her toward a quieter path. They stopped by a fountain in a quiet square. Ethan filled a cup with water and handed it to her. She stared at it, then at him, as if wondering why he was offering it without demanding something in return. Finally, she drank, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. As the day went on, Ethan visited several shops to buy supplies for his ship. The girl followed at a distance, never too close. Once, When a cart came rolling too fast toward her, Ethan instinctively pulled her out of the way. She froze, her wide eyes meeting his for a second, before she quickly looked away. It was a small thing, but he could see her guard shift ever so slightly. By late afternoon, they returned to the inn. Ethan set down the supplies and began sorting them. He glanced at her and said, "You should rest." She tilted her head, unsure if it was an order or a suggestion, when she realized he wasn't forcing her. She quietly sat on the edge of the bed, still watching him that night. Ethan placed a small plate of food on the table before turning in. She didn't touch it at first, but later, when the room was dark, he heard the faint sound of her eating. It wasn't much, but to him, it was progress. In the silence of the night, Ethan thought about her. This girl wasn't a beast. She was surviving. Every bite, every glare, every refusal was her way of keeping control after losing everything. He knew it wouldn't be easy to gain her trust, but he also knew he wasn't going to give up. Somewhere in the dark corner of the room, the girl lay awake too. She didn't understand this human. He hadn't hit her, chained her again, or tried to break her. Instead, he gave her food, water, and space, and that made him more dangerous to her heart than any cage ever had. The morning was quiet, the kind of stillness that felt rare in a busy alien city. Ethan sat at the small table in the inn's room, sipping from a cup of hot tea. The girl was crouched by the window, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring. Outside at the street below, she hadn't spoken a single word to him since they left the market. Not even her name. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Studying her, you know," he said casually. "I can't keep calling you hey or you." She didn't turn around, didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on the movement outside the carts, the people, the colors of the banners. Flapping in the wind, "You need a name," Ethan continued. Her head shifted slightly, just enough to show she was listening. "How about Sira," he said, after a moment. The sound of the name seemed to hang in the air between them. "It means bright one in my language," Ethan added, his voice softer now. The girl glanced at him for the briefest second before looking away. Again, she didn't say yes, but she didn't shake her head either. Ethan smiled faintly. "Sira, it is," he said. The girl Sira remained silent, but her fingers tapped lightly against the windowsill, as if testing how the name felt in her mind. Later that day, Ethan decided to take her out of the inn. They walked through the quieter parts of the city. Away from the noise of the main bazaar, he bought fruit from a small stand and handed one. To her, she hesitated before taking it, biting into it slowly. The juice dripped down her chin, and she wiped it with the back of her hand. Glancing at him as if expecting him to scold her, he didn't. As they walked, Ethan tried talking again. "You've been here long?" he asked. No answer. "You from the outer forests?" Her eyes flicked toward him, then away. It was progress, but still distant. They passed by a group of alien children playing near a fountain. When they saw Sira, they stopped, whispering to each other. One boy shouted, "That's the wild girl. She bites," and laughed. Sira's face tightened, and she turned away, walking faster. Ethan caught up with her, his voice calm. "Ignore them," but he could see the words had cut deep. That evening, back at the inn, Ethan unpacked a few supplies he had. Bought small medical items, clean bandages, and a bottle of antiseptic. He noticed a deep cut on Sira's arm, partly hidden under her sleeve. "Let me clean that," he said, taking a step toward her. She backed away instantly, her eyes sharp and defensive. "I'm not going to hurt you," Ethan assured, holding up the bottle so she could see. Still, she didn't come closer. Ethan placed the bottle and bandages on the table and walked to the other side of the room, giving her space. Minutes passed and she didn't move. But just as he was about to turn away, she stepped forward slowly. Picking up the bottle, she held it for a moment, then looked at him. It was a silent question and unspoken permission. Ethan approached carefully, kneeling so he was at her level. When he touched her arm to clean the wound, she flinched but didn't pull away. Her eyes stayed on him, searching for any sign of cruelty, but all she saw was patience. When he finished, he wrapped the bandage gently. "There," he said. "All done." She stared at the clean bandage, her expression unreadable for a moment. She seemed like she might say something, but instead she turned and went back to her corner. That night, Ethan left food on the table as usual. This time, she didn't wait for him to sleep. She sat down and ate while he was still awake. It was small, but to Ethan, it meant trust was beginning to grow. As the days passed, he kept using her new name. "Sira, pass me that. Sira, stay close." Each time, she looked at him a little faster, responded a little quicker. One evening, while they were walking back from the shops, she quietly said, "Why Sira?" Ethan looked at her, surprised to hear her voice. "Because even in the dark, you shine," he said simply. She didn't reply, but her eyes softened. By the end of the week, she no longer walked far behind him. Sometimes she even walked beside him, her steps still cautious, but no longer hiding. And though she still hadn't told him her real name, Sira didn't seem to hate the one he'd given her. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe she could be more than the wild girl. In the cage, the morning air was crisp when Ethan opened the shutters. Letting sunlight spill into the room, Sira sat on the floor near the wall, her knees drawn up, her sharp eyes following his every move. She had been quieter these past few days, not as tense, but still far from relaxed. Ethan noticed how she kept adjusting the sleeve on her left arm when she reached for a piece of bread. The fabric shifted, revealing the edge of the bandage he had wrapped earlier. It was already stained through. "We need to change that," Ethan said softly. Sira froze, her hand still holding the bread. "I won't hurt you," he added, his tone steady. She didn't respond, her gaze flicking between him and the small medical kit on the table. Ethan didn't push her. Instead, he took the kit, sat down on the floor across from her, and opened it slowly so she could see everything inside. Clean cloths, antiseptic, and a fresh roll of bandage. He placed them neatly in front of him, then waited for several minutes. Neither of them moved, the quiet broken only by the distant sounds of the city waking up. Finally, Sira put the bread down, her movements slow and guarded. She walked over and stood just out of his reach. It wasn't a request, was silent permission. Ethan understood, shifting forward slightly. When he reached out, she flinched, her breath catching. But she didn't step back. Gently, he took her arm and began unwrapping the old bandage. Her skin was warm under his fingers, and he could feel the slight tremor in her muscles. The cut looked better, but was still deep as he cleaned it with a damp cloth. She winced, her jaw tightening. Ethan kept his voice low, almost done, when he began to wrap the fresh bandage. Her eyes stayed locked on his face. It wasn't anger in her gaze. This time it was something closer to confusion. He wondered how long it had been since anyone had touched her without violence. When the bandage was secure, he released her arm and leaned back. "There," he said, "good as new." She stepped away quickly, retreating to her corner. But Ethan noticed she didn't curl up like before. She sat with her back against the wall, her eyes still on him, and for a brief moment, her lips twitched as if she might speak. But instead, she tore a small piece of her bread and ate in silence. Later that day, they ventured outside the inn to a quiet side street lined with small shops. Ethan needed to restock some supplies before leaving the city. Sira followed, staying close but not too close. At a tailor's shop, Ethan bought her a new set of clothes, simple but sturdy. When he handed them to her, she didn't take them right away. "They're for you," he said. "No chains, no collar, just clothes." After a pause, she took them, clutching them to her chest like they might disappear. That evening, she disappeared into the washroom with the clothes. When she came out, her tangled hair was damp, and the collar was gone. Ethan blinked, surprised. She had hidden the collar in her old torn clothes, leaving it behind without a word. For the first time, she looked almost like a free person. They ate in near silence, but the air felt lighter. When the candlelight flickered against her silver-blue skin, Ethan noticed she wasn't keeping her distance as much. She even leaned slightly forward when he poured her water. Small changes, but changes nonetheless. That night, Ethan sat by the window, checking over his travel plans. Sierra lay on the bed, her back to him. He thought she was asleep until he heard her voice quiet, hesitant. "Why?" she asked. He looked up. "Why? What?" "Why? You help," she murmured, the words strange in her mouth. Ethan set his notes aside. "Because you didn't deserve a cage," he said simply. There was no answer, but he saw her shoulders shift, as if she was holding something in before blowing out the candle. Ethan glanced at her one last time. She was still awake, staring into the dark, and though she said nothing more, her grip on the blanket was softer. It wasn't much, but Ethan knew if the first touch had changed something, not just for her, but for both of them. The wind carried a dry, restless scent. As Ethan and Sierra left the inn that morning, they had been in the city for nearly a week, and it was time to move on. Ethan wanted to get back to his small ship on the outskirts, far away from the crowded streets and prying eyes. Sierra walked beside him now, not too close, but no longer hiding behind distance. Her new clothes fit loosely but were clean, and her hair, though still untamed, no longer clung in wild knots. They passed through a narrow street lined with vendors selling metal parts and tools. Ethan paused to check a stall for engine connectors. While Sierra's eyes scanned the crowd, she froze suddenly, her body going stiff. Across the street, a tall alien in a dark coat was watching her. His face was familiar to her, too familiar. It was one of the merchants from the slave pens, the kind who had dragged her from her home. Her breathing quickened. She stepped back until she was half hidden behind Ethan. Ethan noticed instantly, his gaze following hers. The merchant's lips curled into a cruel smile before he melted into the crowd. "Who was that?" Ethan asked quietly. Sierra didn't answer, but her hands were clenched tight, her nails digging into her palms. Ethan's instincts sharpened. He knew trouble when he saw it, and trouble had just spotted them. They left the market quickly, keeping two side alleys. But the feeling of being watched followed them like a shadow that night. They returned to the inn earlier than usual. Ethan locked the door and checked the windows. Sierra sat near the bed, her knees pulled up, eyes darting toward every small sound. "Outside, you're safe here," Ethan told her, but she didn't look convinced. Hours later, long after the city had gone quiet, the sound of the lock clicking broke the silence. Ethan's eyes snapped open, the door creaked, and two figures slipped inside, dark shapes moving fast. One lunged toward the bed where Sierra was. Ethan was already on his feet, grabbing the intruder by the arm and throwing him into the wall. The second one rushed at Ethan with a blade, but Ethan caught his wrist and twisted until the weapon clattered to the floor. Sarah sat frozen, her back against the wall, her eyes wide in shock. The first attacker stumbled up, hissing in a language Ethan didn't understand. Ethan shoved them both toward the door, kicking it shut behind them when they fled. The whole thing lasted less than a minute, but the danger in it lingered like smoke. Ethan turned to Sarah, breathing hard. "You all right?" he asked. She didn't answer with words, she just stared at him, as if trying to understand why he had stepped in front of the blade. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her hands gripping the blanket like a lifeline for the rest of the night. She didn't sleep, she sat close to him, her eyes flicking toward the window every few minutes when the first light of dawn reached the room. She was still there. Ethan knew they couldn't stay any longer. They left the inn without breakfast. Heading toward the outer gates of the city, Ethan kept his pace steady, watching for signs of pursuit. Sci walked right behind him now, not letting more than a step of space come between them. Her usual wariness was replaced by something else's unspoken trust in his presence. Halfway to the gates, she spoke quietly. "They want me back," she said. Ethan glanced at her. "They're not getting you back." She looked down at the ground, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why you care?" Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "Because you deserve to be free." The gates loomed ahead, guarded but busy with travelers. They passed through without trouble. The open road stretching beyond. The air was cleaner out here. The noise of the city fading behind them. Still, Ethan kept scanning the horizon. He knew this wasn't over. The ones who wanted her wouldn't give up so easily. By the time they reached a small forest path, the sun was lowering, casting gold light through the trees. They stopped at an abandoned cabin Ethan had used before on long trips. It wasn't much, just for walls, a roof, and a stone fireplace, but it was safe for the night. Sci sat near the fire he built, her eyes following the flames. Every now and then she glanced at him, like she was still turning over what had happened when they finally settled in. Ethan leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. For a moment, he felt something small and warm against his hand. Opening his eyes, he saw Sci's fingers resting lightly on his. She didn't look at him, but she didn't pull away either. It was the first time she had reached out to him on her own. Ethan didn't say anything. He just let the fire crackle. Between them, outside, the forest whispered with the wind, and inside, something had shifted. Danger had followed them, but so had a new bond, one that no chain could break. The forest around the cabin was calm in the early morning. Bird-like creatures sang from the trees, and a cool mist clung to the ground. Ethan stepped outside to gather water from a nearby stream, leaving Sci by the fire. She sat cross-legged, her eyes tracing the flickering flames for the first time since they met. Her posture wasn't defensive. Her shoulders were relaxed, her hands resting loosely on her knees. When Ethan returned, he set the water down and began preparing a simple breakfast. Sci watched him for a while before quietly standing. She moved toward him without the usual hesitation, reaching for the loaf of bread. She tore it in half and handed him a piece. It wasn't much, but Ethan knew it was the first time she had willingly shared anything. After they ate, Ethan decided it was time to teach her a few basic words in his language. He pointed to the bread. "Bread," he said slowly. Sci tilted her head, then repeated softly. "Bread," he smiled. "Close enough." They went through more words. Water, fire, tree, her pronunciation halting at first, but improving. She didn't speak often, but when she did, there was a flicker of pride in her eyes. Later, Ethan took her to the stream to fetch more water. The forest path was uneven, roots curling across the ground when she tripped on one. Ethan caught her arm before she could fall. She looked at him, startled. He released her immediately, not wanting her to think he was restraining her. But she didn't pull away as quickly as before. By midday, they sat outside the cabin, the sunlight warming the clearing. Sci picked up a small stick and began drawing shapes in the dirt Ethan recognized. One of them as a symbol he'd seen in alien trade markings. "You know how to write?" he asked. She nodded faintly, tracing another symbol. It was her people's word for home, though she didn't say it aloud. They spoke little that day, but their silences were no longer heavy. When Ethan fixed a loose shutter on the cabin, Sci brought him nails without being asked. When she gathered wood for the fire, he noticed she stayed within sight of him at all times. The distance between them was shrinking, not physically, but in trust. That evening, as the fire crackled, Sci broke the quiet. "Ethan," she said. It was the first time she had spoken his name. He looked at her, waiting. "You fight for me," she said slowly. her voice carrying the weight of confusion and wonder. "I told you," he replied, "because you deserve to be free." She studied him for a long moment before nodding once, almost as if testing the truth. In his eyes, when the night deepened, the wind outside grew restless. Ethan checked the door and windows, ensuring they were secure. Sira sat near the fire. Wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, she seemed calmer. But he could see the shadow of fear still there. It would take time for it to fade. As he sat down, she shifted closer to him, not touching, but close enough that he could feel the warmth. Radiating from her, they didn't speak. But the quiet between them was no longer born of mistrust. Instead, it was a shared space, one where words weren't necessary. Before sleeping, Ethan set out a small dagger beside her blanket. "If you're afraid, keep this near," he said. She glanced at the weapon, then at him. "You trust me," she said slowly, almost as if the idea was strange to her. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. Her eyes softened, and she carefully placed the dagger under the blanket within reach. The firelight flickered over her face, catching the silver blue of her skin and the quiet strength in her expression. For the first time, she looked less like someone running from her past and more like someone walking toward a future. Ethan knew the road ahead would still be dangerous. The ones who had hurt her before might try again, but now she wouldn't face it alone. That night, she slept without waking at every sound. And in the stillness of the cabin, the bond between them grew stronger. It wasn't built on chains or force, it was built on small acts, quiet trust, and the unspoken promise that he would stand between her and anything that tried to take her freedom again. The next morning, the forest was bright with sunlight streaming through the leaves. Ethan stepped outside the cabin, breathing in the clean air. Sira followed him, her steps light and steady. She no longer moved like a shadow or hid behind walls. Her gaze met the world openly now. The change had been slow, but it was there in every movement. They packed their things to leave the cabin. Ethan checked his gear while Sira tied a bundle of food and water. She moved with quiet confidence, no longer waiting for instructions. It wasn't obedience. It was cooperation. Ethan noticed the difference, and it made him smile. They took the path that wound toward the small spaceport beyond the forest. Along the way, they passed travelers, merchants, and locals. Some looked at Sira with curiosity. Some with suspicion. She ignored them, walking beside Ethan without shrinking away. Her chin was lifted, her steps, even the wild caged girl from the market was gone when they reached the edge of the port town. The air grew busier, filled with voices. Stalls lined the streets, selling food, tools, and travel gear. It was here, in the crowd, that trouble found them again. The same merchant who had watched Sira days ago stepped into their path. Well, the wildling lives, he sneered. Sira froze, but Ethan moved in front of her. "She's not yours," he said, his voice calm but edged. The merchant laughed. "She's property, she always be property." Ethan's hand rested near his sidearm. "She's free," he said, "and if you try to take her, you'll regret it." The merchant's smirk faded, replaced by a calculating glare. But the crowd around them had noticed, and he didn't dare cause a scene. With a final look of contempt, he stepped back into the market. Sira let out a slow breath, her eyes still fixed on where he had been. They continued to the spaceport without another word. When they reached the docking bay, Ethan's small ship waited. It wasn't much scratched hull, patched wings, but it was home. Sira stepped inside cautiously, her eyes scanning every detail. "This, yours?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded. "Ours now, if you want it to be." She blinked, as if testing whether he meant it, then nodded once. Once aboard, Ethan showed her around tiny bunks, a compact galley, the cockpit with its worn pilot's chair. She listened quietly, touching the metal walls with curious fingers. When they finally lifted off, the ground falling away beneath them, she stood by the window. The planet's forests and rivers spread out below like a painting. For a moment, her hand rested on the glass, her reflection staring back with eyes no longer full of fear. Days passed as they traveled between small trading outposts. Ethan taught her more words in his language. She began speaking in short sentences. Sometimes she even laughed, a sound so rare that Ethan caught himself smiling every time he heard it. One evening, while they shared a simple meal in the galley, she set down her cup and asked, "Why? You keep me?" Ethan leaned back, thinking, because no one should be alone in a cage, he said. Her gaze lingered on him, and for the first time, she smiled without hesitation. It wasn't the smile of someone pretending it was real. Weeks later, they returned to a bustling trade station as they walked through the crowded corridors. People noticed Syrah. Some whispered, "That's the wild girl from Varel Prime." But their tone wasn't mocking. This time Mitt was curious, even respectful. Syrah didn't look away when one trader called out, "Still untamed." She replied clearly, "I am Syrah." The man laughed, but not unkindly. And Ethan caught the faintest glint of pride in her eyes. That night, they docked at a quiet outpost. Ethan leaned against the ship, watching the stars. Syrah stood beside him, her arms crossed loosely. "You know," he said, "you're not the same girl I met in that cage." She tilted her head. "No, you changed me." Ethan shook his head. "No, I just gave you a chance." "You changed yourself." They stood there for a while, the hum of the station in the background, and though neither said it aloud, they both knew the truth. She hadn't been tamed by force. She hadn't been broken. She had been freed by kindness. And now she chose to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. When they finally went inside, the door closed behind them with a soft click. The stars outside burned bright, and somewhere in the vastness of space, a human and an alien girl began the next chapter of their journey together, no longer master and captive, no longer wild and afraid, but partners bound not by chains, but by trust.